tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening, and it will happen rather quickly.
His global trade war targets a longtime U.S. partner, Canada.
The head of the Canadian province of Ontario is threatening to cut off electricity exports to the United States.
I think Canada would be much better off being a 51st state.
Donald, even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
Picture the unthinkable. An early morning scroll through your newsfeed suddenly reveals U.S. troops rolling across the Canadian border. How would you react? Today we'll explore a riveting AI-driven timeline that unfolds like a war novel written by Tom Clancy. And it all feels like a terrifying possibility. How could two peaceful neighbors escalate to all-out warfare? Would the United States' massive firepower beat Canada's rugged defenses? Could NATO survive a conflict between its own member nations? Stay with us, because once this conflict gets moving, nothing about North America will ever be the same. Now, just to be clear, this simulation was created with a large language model like ChatGPT and Grok, not an advanced military AI. So not everything's as accurate as it could be. We had How to Survive love the US and Canada and hope this never happens. But exploring frightening situations like these can be useful and educational. It's kind of what our whole channel is all about. It all starts with a single speech. President Donald Trump, newly inaugurated for his second term, steps before the cameras at the White House. He declares a 25% tariff on most Canadian imports and threatens a 10% tariff on Canadian crude oil.
He wants us to see a total collapse of the Canadian economy, because that'll make it easier to annex us.
Canadian media blasts the president's rhetoric, fueling social media with a flurry of memes featuring a maple leaf overshadowed by the stars and stripes. One side mockingly celebrates the idea of unification. The other side is outraged. Then just days later, Trump doubles down and belittles Canada's Prime Minister in an interview with the press.
Look, I called him Governor Trudeau because they should be the 51st state, really.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wastes no time firing back.
Canadians are reasonable, and we are polite, but we will not back down from a fight.
The two leaders, locked in a war of words, ratchet up tensions. Their televised soundbites stoke nationalist fervor on both sides of the border. Meanwhile, the Pentagon quietly launches Operation Northern Sentinel, a large-scale routine military exercise in states like Montana, North Dakota, and Michigan. Suddenly, M1A2 Abrams tanks, F-35 Lightning II fighters, and advanced drones are uncomfortably close to Canadian territory. According to US officials, it's just business as usual. But the timing is suspicious, and Canadian forces respond by increasing CF-18 Hornet patrols. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte secretly expresses worry that this tension between two NATO members could fracture the alliance from within. The UK, France, and Germany release a joint statement urging restraint and diplomacy. Yet behind the scenes, they scramble to figure out how to deal with this unprecedented scenario, a potential war between two supposed allies. Meanwhile, Canadians and Americans living near the border notice rising prices, supply chain hiccups, and a sense of dread. Stores begin selling out of essentials like bottled water and canned goods. Then, everything changes in early February. The future of warfare isn't just about firepower or who has better drone tech. It's about strategy. And if today's episode teaches us anything, it's that the wars of tomorrow will be won by those who plan ahead. That's exactly what Conflict of Nations is all about. This free online PvP strategy game lets you take command of a real-world nation on the brink of World War III. Your goal? Outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast up to 128 other players in battles that unfold in real time over weeks. You'll be making the same decisions real military leaders do, researching new tech, deploying tanks, stealth bombers, and even nuclear submarines. And just like playing Risk with the homies, you could form alliances, or launch full-scale invasions. You can play on PC or mobile with the same account, meaning you can control the battle whether you're at home or on the go. And right now, Conflict of Nations is offering you an exclusive gift, 13,000 gold and a 1-month premium subscription for free. but it's only available for the next 30 days. So scan the QR code or click the link in the description below and let the battles begin. At the Detroit-Windsor corridor, U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers advance beyond their usual checkpoints for security measures. Canadian agents push back. A heated standoff ensues. Then, gunfire. The exact details are murky. Each side claims the other shot first. In the chaos, one American and one Canadian border officer lie critically injured. This is the final straw. Within days, diplomatic efforts collapse.
Our neighbor to the north has undertaken a massive military buildup on its border with the United States.
The Prime Minister rushes envoys to Washington, but the talks fall apart. The US stands by its notion of a permanent solution for Canada's security shortfalls. Canada retaliates.
Canada will be implementing 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods.
Trump takes to X, slamming Canada's leadership as weak, accusing it of relying on US protection without contributing its fair share. In response, the Prime Minister pushes back, asserting that Canada will always defend its sovereignty. Both men refuse to make concessions, scoring points with their political bases, but leaving the rest of the world horrified. NATO ministers convene a hasty meeting to debate whether Article 5, the principle of collective defense, applies. But who's the aggressor when both are members? This dilemma sparks fierce arguments behind closed doors. The UK tries to mediate, Germany and France consider imposing sanctions on the US, and Canada is left feeling betrayed. By late February, panic buying sweeps across Canadian cities. Long lines at gas stations, empty shelves at grocery stores, and a wave of petty crime follows. In border towns, locals stockpile food, water, and medicine, bracing for the worst. Survival tip. If you live near these tension hotspots along the US-Canada border, like Detroit-Windsor, Buffalo-Niagara, or Seattle-Vancouver, prepare an evacuation plan. Maintain a stash of essentials in your car or home. In a crisis, minutes can save your life. As April rolls around, the US launches targeted strikes on Canadian border infrastructure under a directive labeled Operation True North. The Pentagon claims it's strictly to neutralize threats and secure American interests. F-35s pound critical roadways, rail lines, and checkpoints in the provinces of Ontario and British Columbia. M1A2 Abrams tanks push northward in a brazen show of force. Immediately, the civilian toll begins to climb. Those on the front lines are the first to realize the cost of war. By the third day of Operation True North, Toronto highways are jammed with families fleeing the city. The Greater Toronto Area, home to nearly 7 million people, chokes on fear and gridlock. In Ottawa, the Prime Minister calls for an emergency parliamentary session. Invoking the Emergencies Act, the mobilization of over 20,000 reserve troops and more robust defense across major cities are ordered. Official sources affirm their stance, declaring that every centimeter of Canadian soil will be defended. The King, Charles III, intervenes diplomatically, pressuring the UK, Australia, and India to support Canada. Many observers worry that this move could drag the entire Commonwealth into a much larger war. Meanwhile, the US faces international condemnation. The European Union slaps sanctions on American exports, citing the unprovoked nature of the assault. But Trump still maintains that Canada would not only prosper financially, but also gain better military security if it were to become the 51st state. As global markets shudder, the S&P 500 plunges to the same lows it reached when the COVID-19 lockdowns began in 2020, while the Canadian dollar continues to freefall. Observers recall how Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 set off a global crisis. Now, the dynamic is even more shocking. Two democracies, historically among the closest partners in the world, locked in open conflict. By mid-April, the human cost grows. Artillery shells ignite forest fires in British Columbia. Pipeline leaks contaminate water supplies near the Great Lakes. Entire neighborhoods in southern Ontario go dark from power grid disruptions. Volunteers form militias, channeling the same patriotic spirit once reserved for hockey clashes. But now, the stakes are life and death. Survival tip. In an urban combat zone, stay indoors and identify the nearest shelter. Stay away from windows. Keep a first aid kit and enough water for 3 days. If possible, Use radios with backup batteries, since cell networks may fail under heavy use or sabotage. And if this hypothetical showdown is getting your heart racing, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to How to Survive.
The Canadians are attacking. Run for your lives.
Canadian forces regroup and launch a counteroffensive. Exploiting the dense forests of Ontario to the east and the mountainous terrain of British Columbia in the west, they ambush U.S. supply convoys along major highways. In these surprise attacks, Leopard 2A6 tanks take the lead on the battlefield, while local Canadian militias sabotage American logistics by destroying roads and rail lines. These tactics echo techniques used against larger forces in conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan. At the same time, cyber warriors from Canada's newly formed Cyber Command, with assistance from European allies, attack U.S. networks. But multi-layered U.S. cybersecurity measures prevent most of these attempts from compromising critical systems. Despite this, U.S. supply routes still grind to a halt, and advanced drone fleets go offline. Parts of Minnesota and Michigan experience rolling blackouts, adding to growing anger back in the States. Protests erupt in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Thousands wave signs reading "No War with Canada." Some Americans see the conflict as unjust, while others rally around the flag. Each side's supporters grow more extreme in their beliefs, egged on by social media echo chambers. In an unexpected turn, states like California and New York openly criticize the federal government's approach. Several governors question the legality of deploying National Guard units across an international border for a full-scale invasion. Meanwhile, Canada's allies in NATO remain torn. Officially, the alliance calls for peace, but covertly, the UK and Germany supply Canada with advanced anti-tank missiles and intelligence. After all, they fear a victorious United States could reshape global geopolitics in ways that undermine NATO itself. Survival tip: keep hard copies of important documents like passports, driver's licenses, and birth certificates. Digital networks can be hacked or go down entirely. Cash becomes king if electronic payment systems fail. By the fall of 2025, the war reaches a deadlock. Despite superior numbers and firepower, U.S. forces become bogged down by guerrilla tactics, hostile terrain, and catastrophic supply shortages. Canada's battered but defiant military wages a scorched earth strategy, destroying roads, bridges, and critical infrastructure to slow U.S. advances. The humanitarian crisis spirals. Over 1 million Canadians flee border regions. Tens of thousands of American families with dual citizenships are separated, forced to pick a side. The United Nations organizes emergency relief convoys to major Canadian cities like Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. But road access is limited, airports are under threat, and Canadian ports on the east and west coasts face naval blockades. The war disrupts the global wheat supply. Canada is one of the world's largest exporters. Wheat prices increased by 35%, and many regions experience famine. By early fall, the White House signals a willingness to discuss a ceasefire. Domestically, America faces an economic recession. Prolonged warfare with its biggest trading partner cripples auto manufacturing, steel production, and cross-border finance. Meanwhile, relentless protests and congressional backlash pressure the Trump administration to find a face-saving way out. Across the negotiation tables at UN headquarters in Geneva, representatives from Switzerland and Sweden try to broker peace. But President Trump demands certain conditions, insisting Canada address perceived security gaps and partially demilitarize. Canada's Prime Minister counters that all US forces must withdraw before any terms can be negotiated. The tension is palpable, as though any misstep could reignite the fighting. At this point, the conflict's psychological toll takes center stage. Civilians are both physically and mentally scarred. Homes lost, family members killed or missing, children traumatized. Both sides experience PTSD and survivor's guilt. Here's a tip. After conflict subsides, focus on rebuilding community ties. Join local relief efforts, volunteer for cleanup, and seek mental health support. By January 2026, two scenarios emerge. In one, a tenuous ceasefire holds. Both sides withdraw to pre-war borders. They sign a fragile peace treaty, leaving the relationship between Washington and Ottawa broken, but at least the shooting stops. In another, more dire timeline, the US retains control of parts of Canadian territory, forcing talks for annexation. The question of Canada as the 51st state leaps from social media meme to horrifying reality. Imagine the ramifications. Much like Hawaii or Alaska, Canada would have to navigate a forced transition into the American political system. The addition of 38 million Canadians could reshape US electoral math for generations. Healthcare, immigration, bilingual laws, all up in the air. Some see economic opportunity in a unified North America, but many fear for the loss of Canada's distinct cultural identity. Social media splits into two warring factions. Hashtag Annexation Victory celebrates an economic powerhouse, while hashtag Save Canada protests cultural genocide. The annexation of Canada brings a mix of impressive opportunities and daunting challenges. Let's focus on the bright side for a moment. Imagine a single massive market that boosts trade and investment across the board. There could be a unified defense system protecting the entire continent. Plus, think about how much the two countries already share. They have the same language, love similar sports, and enjoy the same entertainment.
I don't know what you're talking about. Hey,
it's about what we're talking about. And enough of that A business. You're gonna learn how to talk right, understand?
We got ways of making you pronounce the letter O.
That's the promise of 51st statehood. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. On the flip side, annexing Canada could mean losing vital parts of its identity. A stable healthcare system, a proud tradition of bilingualism, and a rich culture mosaic that sets it apart. It might even stir up political chaos in the US, as Canada's inclusion could shake up the Electoral College. And then there are the inevitable social policy clashes, from gun control to environmental regulations, that could ignite fierce debates across the board. In the end, whether this hypothetical scenario resolves in a stalemate or ends with the creation of a 51st state, one truth stands out. War between the US and Canada, two intimately linked neighbors, would be devastating. Economies would collapse, alliances would shatter, and millions of families on both sides of the border would suffer immense hardship. In times of crisis, whether real or imagined, knowing how to protect yourself is crucial. And maybe most importantly, always question the narrative. Governments, media outlets, and even your own social networks can spin a conflict into a win-lose proposition when, in reality, war spares no one. I sincerely hope this never happens and we continue to get along with our neighbors in the north. But the US may want Canada for a different reason, standing up to China. We'll explore what a hypothetical drone war on American soil would look like on another episode of How to Survive. Okay, it's safe to say a full-scale drone war wouldn't end well. But if you want to see how you'd fare in a hypothetical World War III, don't forget to check out today's sponsor, Conflict of Nations. Whether you're launching airstrikes, deploying special forces, or unleashing weapons of mass destruction to reshape the battlefield, this game is the perfect test of survival. Scan our QR code or click the link in the description to start your conquest now and claim your free 13,000 gold and premium subscription before time runs out, soldier.